Saints fans and who that's from all over the world. It's time for the Bayou Blitz, y'all. With Bob Rose and Kyle T.
Happy Wednesday, New Orleans Saints fans, fans of the NFL, and especially fans of the Bayou Blitz. We want to thank you for having us into your homes and over your airwaves again on this beautiful Wednesday evening. I am Bob Rose. I am one of your partners in crime for the Bayou Blitz podcast this week and always. And joining me also, as always, is my partner in crime and someone who is squarely off of the roster bubble is Kyle T. Mosley. How are you, Kyle?
Off the roster bubble. I feel like that fleur-de-lis is sticking me in the butt right now. What you talking about? I'm trying to make the squad, baby. I got a chance. Well, I'm doing well, Bob. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm hanging in there. We are inching ever so closer to the regular season when these football games start to count. We know our friends throughout the Who Dat Nation get emotional whether the games count in the win and loss column or not. But it has been an excruciatingly long off season. And finally, and we know that we're not the only ones sitting on pins and needles, my friend. There's a handful, more than a handful. There's a few thousand players throughout the NFL that are going to be sitting on pins and needles from now until August 31st. And that is when the NFL roster deadline to cut rosters back from 90 to 53 players takes place. So there are going to be a bunch of young men, unfortunately, that may have their NFL dreams, if not dashed completely, then at least delayed somewhat. So our thoughts go out to all of them because remember, hey, Kyle, you and I are fans, but our livelihood doesn't necessarily depend on this. We're not talking about dreams since we were little kids or anything like that. You and I had those dreams squashed a long time ago. But when we watch these games, we have to remember that these are human beings underneath of those helmets and shoulder pads. A lot of them, and you and I have been fortunate. We've gotten to know many players throughout the years, and once you get to know them as people away from the game, you develop a like for a lot of them. Our hearts go out to everybody that they remain healthy, and best wishes out there to all players that are trying to continue dreams that they indeed have had since they, could probably the first time they touched a football.
Yeah, not only that, man, and you've got to be encouraged, guys. You may not make the squad. There's the practice squad. There's someone else's practice squad if you were able to catch someone's eye. And also, there's a lot to learn from being in an NFL locker room, right? And I would not take that blessing lightly, to be honest with you. You can really come away with a lot of life skill knowledge, and you probably forge some good friendships as well. So it's more to it than just playing the game that goes into making the game. So to all those young men who may not make the squad this time, it doesn't mean that your number may not get called in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And you and I forged a friendship with Lyndon Stevens, who was kind enough to come on our show so many times last summer. And Lyndon unfortunately didn't make the cut with the Saints roster last year. But he bounced around. I think he hung on to the Rams practice squad for the longest through the 2018 season. And Lyndon persevered. He now stands a very good chance of making the Denver Broncos roster at cornerback. And although I personally would still love to see him in the black and gold. We forged a good friendship with Lyndon. He's a great guy. Love his father too, Max Stevens, former NFL linebacker. And these are guys that are easy to root for. So I've been tuning into Bronco games whenever I can. I'm rooting for Lyndon.
Yeah. The last game I saw from the Broncos, I didn't get a chance to see him in action. But, when you think about the stories of the young men and their families, supporting them and supporting their dreams, and their kids involved as well. Some of these guys have their own families. You really want to see them persevere through it all. A lot of people have questioned the number 53 or 54, whatever it is that you can be able to be upon the active roster for a team. I think you need to extend it at least 6 more players to be fair, because of depth and problems with depth that teams usually have. And even though that you're not on the, if you're on the active squad, doesn't mean that you're going to be activated for the game on Sunday or Monday or Thursday, right? So I would just, if I were the young man that may not make it, and I've been in the employment industry for the past 27 years of my life, I will coach them to say, hey, take these things that you've learned. Don't look at it as a failure. Just look at it as an opportunity to grow.
Yeah, exactly. And as you know, I have been an athletic coach at the high school level for many years of my life, and I was put in the difficult position of having to tell a young man or a young woman, I'm sorry, you don't have it for the roster right now, and that's heartbreaking. Because again, you're dealing with human beings. And human beings that are trying to do something that they love. And mine was at the high school level. I can't even imagine what Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis and, those guys that are sitting at the professional level, because like you said, Kyle, you're now dealing with people that have families or are trying to support families while at the same time living a dream. So it's definitely not an enviable position. That not only the players are in through this weekend and really beyond, but the coaches as well.
Yeah, coaches, as well as that guy that goes around to collect the playbooks, or now It's not the playbooks, it's the tablets that you have, right? So the Turk, I think that's what they used to nickname the guy. The Turk is coming. So, yeah, beware of the Turk, but also beware to let yourself know that this is not the end of the road for you and your dreams. Please beware of that. Don't take the position that, all is, I can't succeed and nothing is going to go my way. Please don't take that position. All right, man, let's talk about some football, dude. Let's talk about the New Orleans Saints, and we're going to play Miami this Thursday, tomorrow night. So last game of the season, Bobo, and what should the fans expect of the Saints, and what should they expect to see of the black and gold?
On Thursday against Miami, you mean?
Yes, sir.
I tell you, first and foremost, I would be absolutely shocked if we saw any of the Saints' big stars in the game at all. I don't expect Drew Brees, Alvin Kamara, Demario Davis, Michael Thomas, etc. I don't even expect them to get a hat that night, because they've already had their dress rehearsal, as it were, for the regular season opener a few nights ago against the Jets, and I know you and I will get into that in a minute. And this fourth preseason game is often tough to watch. Even me as a avid football fan will always admit that, because you are going to be watching guys that are literally trying to make a last-ditch effort, if not to hook on with their current roster, in this case, since we're talking about the New Orleans Saints, but also an audition of sorts, that if they don't hook on to their current roster, that they catch the attention of coaches and general managers throughout the league, that they may get another shot. So there's a certain amount of desperation, but at the same time, you expect a high quality of play from NFL teams that are on the field. And if you look through the league, and I think all the teams in the league do play tomorrow night to wrap up the preseason. So if you look throughout the league, there's going to be some sloppy play, and it's going to be difficult to watch. from an analyst standpoint, like you and I do, I am going to be watching a handful of players that I consider on the roster bubble, be it veterans or late drafted rookies or undrafted rookies that are trying to make the squad, because there are still a handful of interesting roster battles at the back half of the Saints team that, in my opinion, are still up for grabs.
Battles up for grabs. Also, could it be that some of these roster spots may be filled with people not already on the team, or the Saints may scour the waiver wire for some cuts, and you always have a surprising cut here or two from a team in the National Football League. So could the Saints be ready to be able to pick up some guys who can be able to come in and provide some added depth for the team? And, I think you produced a pretty good roster outlook for the New Orleans Saints, and I know we want to go through that. But let's stay on the game on tomorrow for just one quick second. Do you believe that it's even necessary to even play Teddy Bridgewater right in this game?
Kyle, I would if I was Sean Payton, and here's why. Obviously, Drew Brees has nothing to prove. We know he's not going to get a hat. I personally would play Bridgewater because, in my opinion, as the way the roster stands now, Taysom Hill is more valuable to me on a game-to-game aspect because you're going to have Brees as your starter, obviously, but we know that Coach Payton likes to use Taysom in so many different ways on both offense and special teams. So I worry about injury, and that's the number one thing that I watch for during these preseason games as it is. I often will say to myself, oh, God, please don't get hurt. Please don't get hurt. Okay, Drew's out of the game or Michael's out of the game. Okay, good. I can breathe a little bit easier. Teddy is important to this team because you kind of assume he's probably going to be the number 2 quarterback all year. So that role is extremely important. And I'm knocking on wood as I say this, should Drew Brees miss a couple of games, you need Teddy to be sharp when he does come in because he still needs to win ball games. But I would give him more snaps than Taysom at quarterback because, again, if I'm Sean Payton and I'm running my offense, Taysom Hill is more valuable to me on a game-to-game basis than what Teddy Bridgewater is.
Wow, that's pretty interesting because I kind of thought the same thing. And the reason why I thought it was kind of along the same lines, but I think he also gives Teddy Bridgewater some more reps out there just in case, guys, just in case. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but just in case somebody needs a quarterback. We already have seen what has happened with Andrew Luck's retirement. And I think the young man needs to have an applause for making such a difficult decision, not to be booed by people he has played hard for the past several years.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion. I thought that was very classless of some of those fans. But anyway, that's just me. But Teddy, it could be an audition type of deal for Teddy Bridgewater.
Sure.
And
sure.
I agree that Taysom is more of a value to the Saints because of the different positions and the impact he can make on the game and can do some game-changing type of, I guess, add some more momentum to the team when we need it from here and there, So I agree with you on that point. Here's another question I would ask. We know the cornerbacks have been suspect, not as much Lattimore, but Eli Apple. Do we see extended periods of time for Eli Apple? We know Ken Crawley's on the bubble as well. What's your thoughts there with these guys?
Well, Marshawn Lattimore is one of those guys I wouldn't give a hat to, this Thursday. Eli, I would probably play for at least a few series. Not that he's on the roster bubble or anything like that, but as you've said many times, Eli Apple just doesn't look nearly as sharp as Marshawn Lattimore or some of the other members of that Saints starting defense, by the way. But I wouldn't let Apple get a whole lot of reps because it's the way, unless there's some kind of blockbuster trade brewing, and I'm not suggesting that there is, you assume that you're going to go into Monday night against Houston to open the season with Eli Apple and Marshawn Lattimore as your starting two cornerbacks. Everybody else throughout that depth chart, for the most part, I think, is on the bubble at the cornerback position. You mentioned Ken Crawley. I will put Patrick Robinson squarely on that bubble. Actually, if you read my article in Canal Street Chronicles, he slipped off of my bubble. He did not make my roster projection. But P.J. Williams, Ken Crawley, Patrick Robinson, Kayvon Webster, those guys have all had some moments, but nobody has stood above anybody else to square themselves a roster spot. So we talked as we opened the show about there's still a handful of players that are making some last ditch pushes to try to win a job with these Saints. Just about everybody in that cornerback room is in that position. So I want to see reps from all of them. I would still want Eli Apple again to play a few series because I want to see. I assume that Miami is going to come out and probably play Kenny Stills because they're auditioning him for a trade too. Or for a potential trade, rather. So Miami's going to have a skilled wide receiver out there for at least a couple series as well. I would put Eli Apple on him and say, kid, show me what you got because you haven't been real consistent up to this point. And then after a couple series of that, then I would let Kayvon, Crawley, PJ, Robinson, and I know I'm missing a name or two here. I would let them duke it out because, again, in my opinion, if I'm making these roster decisions, there's not a single one of the guys that I just mentioned that have secured the roster spot quite yet.
Interesting. When we are going to go a little bit more position by position later in the show. But one last question, Bob, and what concerns me is what's happening with our tight ends. Still, we know Jared Cook. We know Josh Hill is going to be there. Dan Arnold, Alize Mack, Derby. Who will make it? Who will not make it? We're going to talk about the who makes it and who doesn't. My question is, who do you play?
I probably give Mac the majority of the reps because he's the one that we have seen the least of. Again, you assume that Jared Cook and probably Josh Hill are going to play very little, if at all. So I would let Mac get the majority of the reps, and not only base offense, but multiple receiver sets, because we know that he was drafted primarily for his athleticism and receiving ability. As far as, because again, if I'm going to pick a roster spot right now and the Saints go into this season carrying 3 tight ends like they think that they will.
We're going to do that later, Bob. We're going to do that later.
Sorry, man. But yeah, I give Mac the majority of my reps. I continue to use Dan Arnold and AJ Derby as we have seen them get used up to this point in the preseason. But you already have a good amount of film on them. Obviously you see them day in and day out in practice, but you have them on film in game action as well. You don't have that luxury with Mac. You've only seen them in a handful of practices in one game. So that's the direction I'd go at that position.
Okay, good stuff, man. Let's see here. We had a poll that we put out for our Bayou Blitz listeners, as well as people on our Facebook fan page, as well as people who visited saintsnewsnetwork.com. And I say, which player position is a concern for the New Orleans Saints before the regular season starts versus the Houston Texans? 67% say the cornerbacks are a major concern. The next group up was the O-line and then the tight ends. So cornerbacks are a concern. I was kind of surprised no one said receivers. We do have some question marks when you get down to the 4th, 5th slot. So we'll talk a little bit more about those guys. Hey, if you're listening live, you can call into the show at 504 533 8444. 504 533 8444 to speak with Kyle as well as Bob Rose. Okay, and don't forget, you can follow Bob at www.canalstreetchronicles.com, and you can follow Saints News Network at saintsnewsnetwork.com, where Barry Hursters has all of his latest featured writings. I did a little piece on Drew Brees this week. Drew Brees is the man, and he proved it in one series. That's all he needed.
Yes, sir.
So I thought that was pretty entertaining. So let's kind of go into a different direction before we head into your predictions on the roster. There was an interesting article out on NOLA.com and a poll kind of who deserves to be in the Saints Ring of Honor other than Ricky Jackson, Martin Anderson, Archie Manning, and those guys, right? Who's been left out? We'd like to hear what you guys have to say. Again, you can call into the show at 504 533 8444. Bob, what's your thoughts there?
Wow, I mean, yeah, and there's so many deserving men of that honor. I was ready to quickly jump in with Sam Mills, also a famed member of that Dome Patrol linebacking core, and Jim Mora defense. But in that same thought, and I'm like, Jim Mora helped put this New Orleans Saints franchise on the map. Granted, he didn't win any playoff games, and let's not recap all the playoff disappointments. But I mean, Jim Mora was the first truly great coach in Saints franchise history. And if you're going to go, look a little bit beyond Mills and Mora, what about Pat Swilling, who, in my opinion, is very deserving of the NFL Hall of Fame?
Yeah, he was my vote. That was my first vote, Pat Swilling.
Yeah, and watching, and Pat Swilling was my favorite Saint to watch among those teams. Especially on the defensive side. Yeah, I know, Ricky Jackson was an absolute monster, and he deserved every single accolade he ever got. But Pat Swilling was just an absolute beast, and the fact that he, and Sam Mills too, for that matter, have been overlooked in the NFL Hall of Fame is an absolute travesty. I have always believed that if they wore a different uniform through their careers, through the prime of their careers, that they would be in Canton.
Look, man, I'm sorry, but Pat Swilling needs to be considered. 5 times Pro Bowl, 4 times three or four times All Pro, right? Mm-hmm. Defensive Player of the Year, led the league in sacks a couple of times, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, What do you need to see? Because he didn't have the gaudy numbers like a Reggie White or Bruce Smith or someone to that nature. He made an impact. Even when he went to the Lions as well as the Raiders, Pat Swilling was very important. But not only that, if we got to look at the community surrounding the New Orleans Saints, this man went to the legislature for representing his district in Baton Rouge. I mean, isn't that community noteworthy to have him a part of the Ring of Honor? I think he needs to be highly considered to be a part of that important dome, not only the Dome Patrol. I think all of those guys, Von Johnson needs to be up there, Sam Mills needs to be up there. All 4 of those guys need to be represented a part of the Saints Ring of Honor. And I'm glad that Mrs. Benson and the PR department this year will do such a great job at promoting more of the older Saints to be a part of the success that's going on now with the team, And I know Shanika Henderson, she just took over, and Shanika is NOLA chick. If you guys don't know, she used to be on with us. I did an in-depth one-on-one interview with her a couple of years ago when she just took over the role as producer for NFL Network. So she's a friend of the show. But I think she's going to bring a lot more life to the New Orleans Saints as well as the Pelicans organization. She has a fresh approach to production, and you're going to see some really great things coming from the New Orleans Saints and their media production this next year and years beyond.
Definitely excited for it because, and I said it to many people. I'm like, the New Orleans Saints were an organization before 2006 when Sean Payton and Drew Brees arrived. That dome patrol linebacking core, Morris defense. You look at offensive linemen like Kyle Turley and Willie Roaf, a friend of ours. There have been some great players come through the doors of that organization well before they won a world championship. We've gotten to know a couple of them, Kyle, Willie Whitehead, Jim Everett, Quinn Early. We could go on and on and on. Bobby Hebert. These guys busted their butts, not only on the field, but throughout the community. So I'm really glad, that Mrs. Benson and the rest of that Saints organization is going to start recognizing the Saints greats of this franchise's past, because we do know that the New Orleans Saints are a very close-knit family, and that not only means the current players and organizations, but the past players as well. I don't have to tell you how many former players that live out of town or out of state come back multiple times during the course of the year, and they do it. The franchise and the Saints Hall of Fame, located in the stadium, do a great job of recognizing some of these guys. I'm just happy to see them kind of expanding their web a little bit.
Yeah. It's good for the relations with the old alumni, but it's also great for these younger fans who are not well versed in knowing how important Pat Swilling and Ricky Jackson were to the organization. And I could go a little bit deeper. Bob Pollard and those guys, the O line and D lines of the New Orleans Saints, Chuck Muncie and those guys, Tony Galbraith. I mean, golly, that's the original Thunder and Lightning right there. So, I mean, there's Wes Chandler also. I can't forget about Wes. We have had some very talented young men, Eric Martin as well, that comes to mind. Jim Haslett did a good job. Mora did great. Jim Haslett, remember, Jim took us to the playoffs. Jim was coach of the year that first season he took the reins. Jim had some really difficult situations to be able to handle. Jim brought us our first playoff win. Aaron Brooks brought us our first playoff win, and people don't realize that as well. There are a lot of guys who have made such an impact to the Saints and this community. You know what would be great? Opening game, national televised game, have everybody who you could come on back, come on that field, represent the Saints organization for that coin flip. That would be great to have them all lined up right there, But anyway, that's just me talking. I might put a bug in the air for that. But anyway, that's how I look at that. Here's another question I have for you, Bob, before we get into talking more about the roster spots. When you look at the New Orleans Saints right now, you have Michael Thomas, who has made such a great impact, Alvin Kamara, who's made such a great impact with the New Orleans Saints as well since their brief tenure with the team. Do you believe that somebody else is right on the cusp behind those guys to really be one of those fan favorites that really is going to be consistent and really people can rely on, that Sean Payton can rely on in his performance on the field?
The first name that comes to mind, there's Breeze, there's Thomas, there's Kamara, obviously. Um, I think the next one that you got to believe, if he's not already there, is the Mario Davis.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
he has been so active in the New Orleans community since his arrival last year. He is a very outspoken, advocate for charities and different things going on. And then you go on to go into his performance on the field. He was worthy, more than worthy, of a Pro Bowl selection last year. We saw how he transformed that entire defense with his sideline to sideline speed and ability. And I think that he is in line for a monstrous season this year. He's so fun to watch play, and he seems like such a great guy. I had some brief conversations with him last summer after he first signed his contract, his first free agent contract with New Orleans, and he's a real asset not only on the field but, like I said, throughout the community. So he'd be my first guess. As far as that next guy to step up and take the mantle. How about you, Kyle? What do you see?
Well, Taysom Hill, if he never
Mm-hmm.
dons the quarterback mantle, he's going to be he's going to be one of those players in Saints lore that people talk about. The legend of Taysom Hill. Think about it, man. If Taysom does one of these fantastic plays in the playoffs and to be able to win a game for the Saints, he just needs one win like that. He probably doesn't even need to do it in the playoffs. Just in regular season, these people will go crazy. They already love the kid.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things about Taysom that is so. I always say this. Some people have it. It's the it factor, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's why people gravitate to him. He has something about him that makes a person say, "Yeah, I'm a root for this guy. I like him." He may not be great, but I like him anyway. So um, Demario Davis, man, Brian Baldinger did a breakdown on him after reviewing the Jets Saints matchup this past weekend, right? And Baldy said, "Why in the world did the Jets ever let him go? It just doesn't make any sense. He's doing such a great job for the New Orleans Saints." I was like, wow, that was so cool. Baldy just took of how well he's performed. Hello, Bob. Bob. Hey, Bob. All right, Saints fans, hold on. Let's see what's going on with Bob Rose's audio here.
You are the first participant on this Uber conference. Please hold while we wait for the others to join.
Okay, guys. Bob Rose is, we had a little weather situation here in the studio, so we are back on the air waiting for Bob Rose to rejoin.
This call is being recorded.
Okay, Bob, you back?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I apologize, guys. We are having some weather issues here around the studio, so that's what threw us off the air. So, but we're back on. So I apologize. We were talking about Demario Davis, and then that's when we got cut off.
Well, welcome back. Hopefully we got the gremlins taken care of, because what the roster cuts are this weekend, Kyle, and we have to do enough to make it.
Yeah, definitely. So let's do this then, man. Let's talk about the Saints and the roster cuts that are looming. Let me go to your article here at Canal Street Chronicles. All right, I had it up a second ago. Here we go. So let's start off with, do you want to do defense first or offense?
Whichever you want, my friend.
Okay, let's start defense. Defensive line. You project that the New Orleans Saints are going to carry 9 guys. Talk to us about some of the guys that are going to be a part of that line.
Well, first of all, I think that they will carry 9 defensive linemen, mainly because, and I don't know when we got cut off completely, when we both got cut off completely from our listeners, but Sheldon Rankins was activated from the injured list this week.
Wow.
That was a curious move. It's great news for him, because it tells us that he's well ahead of his rehab schedule. But we still don't expect to see him on the field for at least a month. And so that therein lies the surprising part to me, that now Rankins will now count as a roster spot when these cut downs are made. So you have to, in my opinion, you have to carry an extra defensive lineman still, because Rankins is not ready to play. We know David Onyemata is going to be suspended for 1 game, so he's not going to count as a roster spot until after that week, after week 1. But you have to keep that one in mind too. And Mario Edwards Jr. has been extremely nicked up over the last couple weeks. So with that in mind, that's why I kept 9. And I like the depth. I know a lot of Saints fans will disagree with me here, but I like the depth that this team has on the defensive line. Trey Hendrickson has been playing out of his mind good, and I hope that he carries that into the regular season, because that gives us a good, solid 3-man rotation at end with Cam, Marcus Davenport, who I think the light switch will come on at some point, and Trey. And inside, we saw how effective that interior rotation was last year, Kyle. Rankins isn't ready to play, and Onyemata, luckily, is only going to miss 1 week. But Taylor Stallworth is playing really well. We expect big things from Malcolm Brown. And I think that Sean Payton is going to carry Sylvester Williams and Ziggy Hood as well, at least into the regular season. Once you get Onyemata and Rankins back, those guys may be cut down if they're not playing really, really well. But that's why I carried an extra defensive lineman compared to what they usually do going into the regular season.
Yeah, and barring injury as well, right? That's something that we need to pay attention to. So you have Jordan, Henderson, Davenport, Edwards, Malcolm Brown, Stallworth, Williams, Hood, Rankins. Notable cuts will be Wes Horton. Wow, that's a notable cut. Porter Gustin, he really hadn't had a chance to really shine anyway. And Shy Tuttle. And David Onyemata is going to serve that 1-game suspension. So therefore, who out of the cuts could possibly make it to the practice squad?
Keep in mind, as you know, whoever does get released from NFL rosters has to clear waivers first. And if they do, then an NFL team can sign them to their practice squad if they have less than, and I think it is 2 years or less, accrued NFL experience. So out of that group on the defensive line, I think Shy Tuttle has shown us some things this preseason. I just don't think he's done anything to stand above the veterans like Williams or Ziggy Hood. And I think that Sean Payton and Dennis Allen are going to feel a little bit more comfortable heading into that regular season opener with some veteran experience there. But if Shy Tuttle clears it, first of all, it wouldn't surprise me if Shy Tuttle did make the cut over one of the vets that I did mention. But if Shy Tuttle clears waivers, I think that he is going to be snatched up on that Saints practice squad.
Okay, good. Good stuff there. Let's talk about the linebackers. You have 6 guys projected: Davis, Anzalone, Klein, Robertson, Caden Ellis, wow, and Vince Beagle. The guys who will be cut will be Jumper and Sankey. Tell us a little bit about your decisions to bring those guys on. Could this also be a spot where the Saints could scour the waiver wires and bring somebody in?
Yeah, it very well could be. It could be a position where the Saints might bring in a release from another NFL team. And the main reason is this. We don't know. Anzalone has been dinged up with injury, although everything we're hearing indicates that he'll be ready for week 1. Craig Robertson is another story. We don't know the exact injury that Craig suffered against the Chargers, but it looked bad. And whenever you hear a player say, I felt and heard something pop, that's just not good. So until we know the status of that, I'm comfortable with the 6 guys that I have there. The trio of Davis, Anzalone, and Klein, if they're all healthy, they're a terrific trio of linebackers. Robertson is as good a 4th linebacker as there is in the league, capable of playing inside or outside. And Caden Ellis has really impressed me with his sideline-to-sideline ability. He has played the bulk of the snaps in the last 2 games. And not only that, but he can contribute on special teams, while Beagle is a special teams demon at times and can rush the passer pretty well from the outside when he's asked to. But if Robertson is going to be out for quite some time, or Anzalone's injury is a little bit more serious than we thought, then you're going to see the Saints bring in probably a couple veterans that get released from other NFL teams to sort of kick the tires on them.
Look, don't be surprised, guys. In my opinion, may not mean much to you, but Caden Ellis may become our next middle linebacker sooner than you think.
Mm-hmm.
And we forgot about Will Compton. Compton is right there on the bubble. He hasn't been able to show too much right now. He didn't have much of, I guess, a role in the last game, just coming into the team. But I'm pretty sure they're going to give him some extended looks against the Dolphins. Okay, so let's go to the cornerbacks. Cornerbacks, you project 5 guys: Lattimore, Apple, Williams, Justin Hardy, and Kayvon Webster. Notable cuts: Patrick Robinson and Ken Crawley. Wow, shocker. Tell us what's going on. What's happening there, Bobo?
Well, we know that the Saints struggled mightily against multiple receiver sets against teams that had deep receiving cores, and they did so primarily out of the slot. They did a little bit better once they acquired Apple, stuck Apple on the outside, and moved P.J. Williams into the slot. And Patrick Robinson, as you know, Kyle, missed all but 3 games last year because of injury. Robinson and Williams are both much more effective in the slot than they are on the outside. They are completely different players when you move them outside. Frankly, both players look completely clueless in outside coverage, and I'm terrified when I'm terrified when I see them on the field. Robinson, to me, has struggled altogether, even in slot coverage, throughout most of the preseason. And this team needs some depth at the outside spots. You certainly hope that Lattimore and Apple stay healthy all year, because they are the 2 best cornerbacks that are currently on the roster. But Kayvon Webster, he does have starting NFL experience. He was a valuable member of the Denver Broncos Super Bowl championship defense and a starter for the Rams before he went down with an Achilles injury, I believe, that after 2 years he looked fully recovered. But Kayvon can play outside. He can move into the slot if you ask him to. So he gives them a little bit more versatility than someone like P.J. Williams or Patrick Robinson. Justin Hardy has played pretty well and made a case for himself, as John Hendricks of the Canal Street Chronicles pointed out to us last week. Hardy's made a case for himself to win a spot as a backup at cornerback, in addition to being one of the team's best special teams players. So I actually think Hardy's spot is relatively safe. So if you play the numbers game, that brings you down to, who do you feel more comfortable between P.J. Williams and Patrick Robinson?
Nobody.
I feel much. What's that?
I say nobody.
Well, no. But if I had to choose between the two, I would choose P.J., and I would still want my fifth cornerback to give me depth along the outside, which brings us to, do you want Kayvon Webster or Ken Crawley?
Right.
Crawley, I was a big fan and supporter of in 2017, and he just fell off a cliff and has not been heard or seen since. And I feel more comfortable with Kayvon Webster's play. So that's why I kind of chose him to round out my cornerback depth chart.
Yeah, shocking. Ken Crawley had a promising, what looked to be a promising 2018, right? And it just did not materialize for him. So let's go to the safeties, guys. Safeties, you project 5 guys. That'll be Von Bell, who is playing out of his mind. Marcus M.I.E. Williams and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, the law firm, as well as Saquon Hampton and J.T. Gray. You have Chris Banjo as a cut. That is surprising to me because I think Banjo has outplayed Gray. What's your thoughts there?
I actually think just the opposite. I think Banjo has played very poorly defensively all preseason long. He has looked clueless to me at times, particularly against the Chargers game, in the Chargers game 2 weeks ago. But I didn't think that he did anything to stand out against the Jets either. I know that Chris Banjo is one of the better special teams players, not only on the team, but throughout the league. But this team, the Saints, they surprised me last year when they kept J.T. Gray at defensive back over Lyndon Stevens and a couple of other, Natrell Jamerson and a couple of other guys that they moved on from. So, that tells me that they like something that Gray is doing. Gray is a solid special teams performer as well. And I think that Gray has played better defensively than what Chris Banjo has throughout this preseason.
Wow.
Now, having said that, it wouldn't surprise me. Really, it was a coin flip between Banjo and Gray. I think that they're going to go Gray because he's a little bit younger, and again, just from what I have seen defensively, however you want to take that. But we don't know how serious Saquon Hampton's injury is. He's been out of the last 2 games. And some mumblings have the Saints perhaps stashing Hampton on injured reserve. He's in no danger of getting outright cut, in my opinion. But we see the Saints do this every year with a couple of young players. An injury that might not keep them out for the year, they'll still put them on injured reserve to keep them away from other teams. If they do that, then both Gray and Banjo make this team. But if Hampton is healthy, he showed us a lot through OTAs and early in both training camp and the preseason games, and I think he quickly secured a spot on this roster. Gardner-Johnson, we do expect big things from. We talked a couple minutes before about slot coverage for this New Orleans Saints secondary. He may assume the number 1 slot role early into the regular season, and that's if he doesn't earn a starting safety spot over your friend Marcus Williams.
Marcus Williams, could he be potential trade bait?
Yeah, he could. Yeah, he could. Again, a lot would depend on the injury to Hampton. If Hampton ends up being healthy sooner rather than later, and we even heard Sean Payton kind of hint at that today about how deep he felt his safeties were, that the team would field some trade calls. He didn't specify who, but that does make you wonder. And Williams, and you and I have been agreed on this point for almost a full year now, that Williams just does not look the same as what he showed us this rookie season. And he had a couple blunders against the Jets, too, that if a more accurate pass was thrown, we might have been talking about a different result rather than what we saw on the field.
Right.
But Williams continues to be a step or two slow in reacting on the back end. He doesn't seem to be trusting his instincts. You hope that he regains his confidence, but up to this point, he hasn't. So if the team were, if you were to tell me, Bob, pick 2 or 3 players off of the Saints team that could be traded before the regular season opener, Marcus Williams would be on that list.
Look, I said it first. I said it last year. Remember, I said this guy is not trusting what he sees, and better yet, what you feel on the field, man. And Saquon Hampton, if he did not get injured, was poised to take over that role. Let's just call it for what it would have been. He was poised to take over that role, and I think his injury kind of set some other things into motion, but I don't know if Gardner has the speed to be able to play center field, I don't know if they want a bigger guy back there. I don't know why, because we're going to play some fast teams, especially the first half of the season. So I would be interested to see what happens, and I think you bring up some great points. All right, let's start off with the specialist before going into the offense. Specialist Will Lutz is kicking like a Hall of Famer, to be honest with you. I like what I see in Will Lutz. Of course, we have a Hall of Famer, in my opinion, with Thomas Morstead right there.
Yes.
I got to say this, man. Thomas Morstead does not get enough love in the National Football League. I heard all these guys, Lecter and who's this other guy a couple years ago, just because they had these great punt averages and they played on poor teams and what have you. But when Lecter went over to the Texans, he was not the same Lecter, But Morstead has been as consistent as anybody since coming to New Orleans, man. And I just think he doesn't get enough love. Zach Wood, the long snapper you have there, I'm pretty sure he is not in any danger of getting cut at all. But one notable cut, another potential trade guy, Marcus Sherrills. We have not seen him. We signed him to that big contract. Bob, what's the dealio?
That is extremely curious to me because I don't know about you, but I have not heard anything about Marcus Sherrills being injured. And I think all of us were excited for this signing because of what he was able to do while with the Minnesota Vikings as a kick and punt returner. And we haven't seen him on the field. And credit Deontay Harris, the rookie, undrafted rookie from Assumption. He grabbed that role and just he put a stranglehold on it and just has not let it go.
I think something has to be wrong with him, man. Something has to be wrong with Sherrills. You not to see the guy in a game at all, That's bewildering. Bob, did I lose you?
And I do.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. You started to cut out on it. It is extremely Sherrills. But I have loved what I've seen, not only from Deontay Harris, but when they used Cyril return as well. Grayson looks really exciting in the open field. Now, I think if you were to choose between the two to be your kick returner, I think that Sean Payton feels certain that Deontay Harris is going to open the season as his kick returner, which leads you to believe, if Marcus Sherrills isn't going to be a cut, are they going to try to get maybe a late round draft choice for him because of his history, even if he is a little bit nicked up? More is probably going to come to light about that as we get into the weekend, especially if we don't see Sherrills on the field against Miami tomorrow night.
Yeah, good point. Dante Harris got to secure the ball better, though. Sean Payton mentioned that in one of his press conferences earlier this week. You've got to do a better job, and I was looking at how he was holding the football. That is something you have to work on, going through traffic or even seeing guys potentially coming your way. Securing the football is more important than making a break for it. All right, so let's go to the offensive guys, man. And, the Saints have a log jam at receiver, but we're going to start off with the tight ends, man. Tight ends. We got three guys. We got Jared Cook, Josh Hill, and Dan Arnold projected by you. Notable cuts will be Mack and Derby. Talk to us about these guys.
It is disappointing to me that we haven't seen Cook on the field more often in practice. I hope he's healthy. We haven't heard anything to suggest otherwise. Josh Hill, we know what we're going to get from him as a short, receiver, particularly near the goal line, and he's an outstanding blocker. So those two spots are no-brainers, which brings us down to, and we alluded to it earlier in the show. If they carry three tight ends, and I do think that they will, do you love the athletic and receiving potential of Alize Mack, even though we haven't seen anything from him? I went with Arnold because I know that the Saints coaches love his work ethic and downfield receiving ability. He has been he has been infuriatingly inconsistent.
You think?
And Derby, I love the way Derby is playing. Frankly, if it were my team, I would choose Derby over Arnold, just because of what he could give me. If one of my starting two tight ends go down, I know that I can put Derby in, and he is going to function reasonably well out of any alignment. He's a better blocker than Arnold. He's not going to be a downfield threat, but he can make plays in the intermediate zones for you. And we know that Breeze likes to pepper that the opposing defense's intermediate zones.
And that's why. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, man, and that's why I think Derby's going to win over Arnold, especially if he has a pretty good game against the Dolphins and Arnold has a so-so game. I think Derby is going to be the guy. Go ahead, you project.
And that's where and I'll probably have to stay up late tonight to do it. As far as players that have one last final-ditch effort to make a roster case, A.J. Derby is squarely on that list, because I agree with you. If he has a very good game against Miami and Arnold continues to be inconsistent, I think it's a 50-50 shot between the two of them. Frankly, I love Mack, and I love what he could potentially bring to the offense. You just can't really make a case for picking Mack over either Arnold or Derby. I hope that Mack clears waivers so that way they can stash him on the practice squad for a year and he can continue to learn.
Yeah, I think that's most likely going to happen. I don't think anybody is going to be highly let's pick up Mack when they haven't seen too much of him as well. So he has a good chance to clear waivers. Let's go to the offensive line, man. Offensive line, you have Mr. Armstead, your perennial All-Pro there, as well as Mr. Ramczyk. Those are no-brainers, as well as Mr. Walford. Then we get down to the rookie at center, Mr. Eric McCoy, and we have Cameron Tom, Nick Easton, Michael Ola, and the Mr. Turkey Arms, I call him, Mr. Andrus Pete. Andrus, all with love, man. But, those guys are pretty steady. We have those guys. We know what we're going to get. Andrus Pete and Armstead have a great tandem on that left side protecting Drew Brees. So if those guys can stay healthy, it's going to be great. We see a great potential upside with Eric McCoy. But here we go. We got Tom, Easton, and Mr. Ola. Notable cuts, you have Will Clapp and Newhouse. I think Newhouse is he's going to be on the outhouse pretty soon. So talk to us, why would the Saints keep Ola over Clapp?
Only for a name at offensive tackle. This is just my projections. Granted, I mixed in a little bit of what I would do if I was Sean Payton. But I think that the Saints would be better off if they kept Will Clapp, moved on from Ola and Newhouse. And if something, and again, I'm knocking on wood when I say this, if something were to happen to either Ryan Ramczyk or Teron Armstead, we have seen them not hesitate to move Andrus Peat to the outside and plug in one of their interior depth players. And Clapp is just that, as is Nick Easton. Cameron Tom has outplayed both Clapp and Easton on the inside, in my opinion, throughout the 3 preseason games. But Easton, that they signed to this big contract, and Clapp, they've both been extremely inconsistent. I would feel more comfortable with either of them playing Pete's left guard position and Pete on the outside than I would plugging either a Michael Ola or a Marshall Newhouse in.
Right.
But here's one of those spots, and I don't remember whether I stated this in the article or not. Here's one of those spots where the Saints are definitely going to scour the waiver wire and other players released from other teams. I would fully expect them to bring in probably 3 or 4 different tackles to audition. We're going to see the 7th and 8th spots on this offensive line probably be a rotating door. At least early in the season until Sean Payton and Pete Carmichael find somebody that they like there. Because I know you feel the same way I do. I would be terrified for the health of Drew Brees and Alvin Kamara and anybody in that Saints offensive backfield if Michael Ola or Marshall Newhouse were to pull down some snaps. Will Clapp, I do believe, would be eligible for the practice squad if he cleared waivers. So you might not necessarily lose him if you exposed him to the waiver wire. But that's kind of why I went with Ola over Clapp for that reason.
Yeah. And I can't disagree with you. Everything you say makes total good sense, man. The one thing that I am concerned with, I don't think Will Clapp is playing that well. And I watched him in that Jets game get turned around quite a few times, man. And that's what concerned me about him. I don't see any progression. Remember, I stated that last week. Where's the progression? And if you're playing against another third stringer and you're getting turned around, what are you going to do with a guy like let's say the guy from the Rams comes at you and attacks you? You're not going to be able to handle that, man. So that concerns me there. And I really do believe the Saints need to go and do some scouring out there. You saw today that the Patriots traded for the guard that the Ravens had. So that's a sign that people are making some transactions happen, and I think the Saints may do the same thing if Easton and Clapp do not perform up to their abilities this week. So we shall see how everything translates there. At running back, you have Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, as well as Ozigbo and Dwayne Washington, as well as Mr. Zach Line. And the Saints are going to carry 5 guys. And notable cut will be Jacquizz Rodgers, the perennial NFC South guy. He was with Tampa Bay as well as the Falcons. Ozigbo, very interesting. You saw some elusiveness from him, and I like his balance as well. With Dwayne Washington, you saw some... I would say you saw some power here and there sometimes. It still concerns me about his receiving ability. He dropped another ball, that was right in his hands in the Jets game. So that concerns me about him. Any surprises? Do you think this stays as it is, or should a good vet pop up? Would the Saints be able to bring him in?
It wouldn't surprise me if a veteran or two were available, that New Orleans might bring him in. But I do think that they like what they have in that running back room. Obviously, we don't have to talk about the skills of Kamara or Latavius Murray. We're really excited about what they're going to bring to the Saints offense this fall. The same with Zach Line, one of the better blocking fullbacks and pass-catching fullbacks in the league. Sean Payton himself has raved about Dwayne Washington on more than one occasion this summer. And Washington, he does run with good power. When I watch him, it kind of frustrates me that I see some hesitation from him in the hole sometimes. But he does run with good power, and he has a nice burst of speed in the open field. You bring up a great point, though. He will give you very little as a pass receiver, which has us circle around to Mr. Ozigbo, who you and I have both loved since they signed him right after the draft out of Nebraska. Ozigbo, he did big shoes to compare him to, I grant you, but he has a style that's somewhere in between Pierre Thomas and Mark Ingram. Divine can make some nice catches out of the backfield. Even saw him line up, I think, out of the slot once or twice against the Jets. Didn't get thrown the ball, but he looks like he could be a potential weapon in the screen game. I love how he runs. I do, and that's where he reminds me of Ingram. He runs with authority and has that little bit of wiggle to him to make a tackler miss. He's not just going to run you over. He's a versatile runner. We don't have to remind you, Saints fans, about the history that this team has with late round draft choices or undrafted gems. The list is pretty long at both running back and receiver. And I'm not saying that Divine Ozigbo is going to be the next Pierre Thomas, but I think that the Saints really like him. And I had to leave him on my roster projection because he's one guy I don't think would clear waivers if they released him with the hope of signing him to the practice squad.
Yeah, I like the kid. I like what I see in him. When he was out in the open, he made guys miss. He even had a couple of broken tackles right going through the middle. So, yeah, I like what I see in his ability. That's why he has such a great yards per carry average when he was with the Cornhuskers. So I like what I see there. Let's talk about the wide receivers, man. You got 6 guys. You got Michael Thomas, Ted Ginn Jr., as well as Mr. Kirkwood, Traquan Smith, and Emmanuel Butler, and Deontay Harris as the kick returner / wide receiver. Notable cuts will be Cyril Grayson as well as Austin Carr. Wow, that's surprising. And little Jordan Humphrey and Simi Cobbs. Man, look, you look at all of these guys and you can make a case for everybody, right? After Ginn and Traquan Smith and Thomas, you can make a case for everybody switching in and out here and there. Austin Carr is the one that is kind of, what do we do with him, Because Drew Brees loves him. He has great hands. You don't see him putting the ball on the ground, and he runs very good routes. He's not very fast, but he's one of those, would you say, dependable type of guys like Lance Moore or someone. So what's your thoughts there, debating between he and, let's say, Emmanuel Butler?
This is the toughest position to project, and I want to go. I want to go on record. Sean Payton, Pete Carmichael. If you guys are listening right now, first of all, thank you and give us a call. But I want you to throw the ball on every single down against Miami tomorrow night, because I want to see all of these receivers in action. I'm excited about what any of them could bring to the field, but at the same time, none of them have really separated themselves from the other. So while I would feel comfortable with any of, my notable cuts in the article, I would feel comfortable if the Saints would keep them, any of them. But it was so tough. We know what people were raving about Emmanuel Butler through the early part of training camp, almost every practice. But we didn't see anything in the first 2 preseason games. We did see him, I think he caught 4 passes, and it was only for 27 yards. But you saw why training camp observers were so excited about him, because he uses his body well in traffic. He secures the ball quickly with terrific hands, and he turns upfield. And even though he's a big body guy, which, by the way, Sean Payton likes him and his receivers most of the time, he does have some elusiveness after the catch. That's why I gave him the edge over Austin Carr, because Emmanuel Butler can play outside or slot. Carr is pretty much a slot guy. I think that Emmanuel Butler can give you more offensively than what Austin Carr can. again, I wouldn't shed tears. I wouldn't pound the desk in frustration if they said on Saturday, hey, we're cutting Emmanuel Butler and we're keeping Austin Carr. I can make a case for either one, like you just did. The guy I would love to see them make room for, but I can't really see happening, is Cyril Grayson. We know about his world-class speed. We've known about it since LSU. That kid has impressed me in both practice footage that I've seen and game action. He needs to sharpen his routes a little bit, but he's a more accomplished route runner than I thought he would be. He has good footwork along the sidelines, and he might not have the hands of Emmanuel Butler or Austin Carr, but he has good hands. He's unbothered in traffic, which is unusual for a track guy. If you look through NFL history, in any other season, I think that Cyril Grayson would probably find a place on the back half of this roster. But this receiver room is so full right now that unless they surprise us with a move or two towards the top of the depth chart, which you and I will get into in a minute, I think that they're going to pick either Emmanuel Butler or Austin Carr. I went with Butler because of what he can bring more to the offense than what Carr can.
Interesting. Kirkwood, I love him. I think he's on the bubble. Between Carr, Kirkwood, and Cobbs, one of those guys stays and somebody goes home. That's my opinion. Little Jordan Humphrey, I think the room was too crowded, man. That's all. The wide receiver room, too many good guys, too much talent. They're not going to take you know what? Traquan Smith has the potential to be one of those guys. Could you shop or could you listen to an offer here or there?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're going to give up on him, but he has that potential. You can see at times that he can make a play, but at times is MIA. So it's one of the ways that you really don't know what you have until you see some consistency in his performance. That's what we need to see year two in Mr. Smith. All right, so we got the wide receivers, we got the running backs, we got the O-line, we got the tight ends, and then we go to a couple guys. I don't even really know this guy. His name is Drew, what's his name? Breezes? I think that's his name. And Teddy Bridgewater and Taysom Hill, 3 quarterbacks, 3.5 quarterbacks, and a utility knife. So you guys got any problems with them? No, I think it's pretty clear. Now, would the Saints listen to trade rumors or trade talks or trade whatever for Mr. Bridgewater? I think that's highly likely or possible. The Colts, I know they have Brissett and the kid Chad Kelly from, was it Ole Miss? I think Ole Miss. And they just brought in Brock Osweiler as a possible backup to be able to vie for that backup role. They haven't signed him yet. But, I mean, these are just projections, right? And we have seen year in and year out with Mr. Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis, where they just make these cuts. You like, no! But it all works out. So, we will see what happens after the game on Saturday, who's going to be released and who can clear waivers and get to the practice squad as well. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, man, and I know you want to talk about at the top of the rosters and everything else. A.J. Klein, I've got this – I know some guys said he had a good preseason. I didn't see it. And I just have to say it like this. I just did not see it. What am I missing, Bob?
You broke up on me, Kyle. I apologize.
Can you hear me now? I say A.J. Klein.
Better, yes.
I guess it's me or I need to see more tape. I haven't seen it. I don't know why, but am I missing something?
Of the team's three projected starting linebackers, Davis, Anzalone, and A.J. Klein, you have to identify A.J. Klein as the weak link, for a couple reasons. And you know these reasons, Kyle. You and I, complain about Klein on almost a weekly basis. Klein, if you said, A.J., go get the ball carrier. Make a play between the tackles. He will give you that. He zeroes in on that backfield as good as anybody. And he can make plays in front of him. He hits you like a ton of bricks. And he will force turnovers. You get AJ in space and he is helpless. And that's the big difference between him and Demario Davis. I know, many people took umbrage with what you and I were both saying last year when we were wanting Craig Robertson on the field, because we thought that he could bring better athleticism to the position than Klein. People were showing us 40 times how comparative they were. Well, that's fine. That's straight line speed. Robertson or even Caden Ellis, who has showed us some good sideline to sideline ability this preseason. I think that I would take either Robertson or Caden Ellis in space before I would A.J. Klein. When Klein is in the lineup, he does struggle in space, and that could create a liability. Davis and Anzalone are going to be your every down linebackers. But if, for example, say Anzalone were to be limited by injury or even miss some time, then you have to put A.J. Klein in that spot on a third down or multi-receiver sets. When the offense spreads your defense out, in an alignment like that, if I'm the offensive coordinator or opposing quarterback, I'm going to look for number 53, and that's who I'm going to target. And that's where the Saints defense could struggle with him in the lineup.
As I said earlier in the show, Mr. Ellis will be seeing some extended period of action for the New Orleans Saints regular season. Watch. Trust me on this. I know what I'm talking about. And if I don't know what I'm talking about, I still believe it can happen. So anyway. Okay. Any last comments, Bob, before we get off the air?
Uh-oh.
Bob? Hello?
You with us?
Yeah, I'm here. Any last comments?
Kyle, you're breaking up on me, but if
can you hear me now?
I heard you correctly, you asked about any last words.
Yes.
I'm going to zero back to that receiver position. And again, Coach Payton, tomorrow night, throw the ball on every down. We still want to see some things from these receivers. I mentioned it on the Jordy Haltberg show, 103.7 out of Lafayette, Louisiana on Monday. Kyle, you mentioned that Marcus Williams, your hot take was that Marcus Williams could be dangled as potential trade bait, and I agreed with you. A guy offensively that I'm not calling my shot, but I'll give a hot take. Do not be surprised if the team decides, if they like this receiver depth out of these young guys that we've outlined tonight, they might stash a Keith Kirkwood on injured reserve because he's been nicked up. Or not cut, but if they could get a trade offer from a receiver-needy team for someone like Traquan Smith, they could make that move. I wasn't brave enough to call my full Babe Ruth type of shot in the article, but I can kind of see that happening. Otherwise, Saints fans, we've been talking for over a year now about how deep this team is. And remember, anybody that takes issues with anybody else's roster projections, look at what we're talking. Look at what we might be arguing about. The final 6 or 8 spots on this team. This is a luxury, folks. Where the Saints have a Pro Bowl caliber type of talent at just about every position. So enjoy it. Pray for health tomorrow night, but root for these guys because there's still a lot that's going to be decided in tomorrow night's game and between now and Saturday.
Yes, sir. I agree. Can you hear me now, Bob? Okay, so we're still having some technical difficulty between Bob and I. But anyway, guys, you can follow Bob Rose at canalstreetchronicles.com, and you can follow us at www.saintsnewsnetwork.com. This is Kyle T. Mosley of the Saints News Network. Don't forget, follow our boys on Black and Gold when they play the Dolphins on tomorrow night. It is the preseason finale. This is Kyle T. Mosley. You guys have a good one. Who dat, baby?